Welcome to my overview for the SSF Ultra Random Analog, arguably the most powerful and feature-packed random module in URA. I've been having loads of fun with it, so let's get stuck into all the features. Starting with the sample and hold, I'll first look at the sample and hold A circuit. I'll take out the clock generated on the unit to trigger the FM mode on braids, and then I'll take the cable into the sample and hold A's output and then take that into the oscillator's pitch. There's white noise patched to the input of the sample and hold when no input is present, and we've got a signal level at the top of the module. This is affected by the clock rate. And there's also a clock range button. Moving on to the sample and hold B circuit, this is also triggered by the same clock, although this can be clocked externally. There's white noise patched to the input from a separate circuit, just like the A circuit. Sample and hold B is different in that it has an additional slew circuit. Here I'll look at using the inputs to the sample and hold circuits, and I'll start with a fast audio rate clock and an LFO at the input. You can see on the LED cable to the right that the LFO signal is coming in. Turning down the clock, you'll hear this LFO start to step. And you can see the clock rate on the purple LED in the centre of the module. Taking this into sample and hold circuit B, we'll get the same thing. But we do have the addition of the slew in this part of the module, so we can smooth out those voltage changes. As there's noise normal to the sample and hold circuits, I'll look at using this as an audio source, and the clock rate goes right up to 23 kHz, which is above our human hearing range. Turning down the clock rate, we'll get some classic Atari style 8-bit gaming sounds. And the level control is just going to act as a volume control for the noise. Sample and hold B circuit is the same as it has been so far, but we do have this slew on the channel which will act like a low pass filter for the noise. Using the clock FM input, we can put in an LFO and affect the clock rate for some basic noise effects. I'll play around with the LFO going into the clock FM. Going into the input of sample and hold B with some audio instead of using the normal noise for that sample, I'm going to use the internal clock and then use that as a sample rate reducer. The final thing I'll look at with the sample and hold is a toggle output, and this is a third additional output that toggles between the onboard noise for circuit A sample and hold and the circuit B for the second sample and hold. To ensure it doesn't have the same value as either of the sample and hold, it's got a slight delay in the module that makes sure that the noise that's passing between all these is always different, giving 3 different outputs at any time. I've got 3 triangle waves all coming from separate IntelliGel Dixies, and I'm going to use the 3 sample and hold outputs on this to go into a quantizer to create 3 basic overlapping melodies. With the output of sample and hold A into my quantizer, you can hear one oscillator start to move. Here's using the toggle output for the second oscillator's pitch sequence while the third one still holds. And then I'll take the third sample and hold B into the third channel on my quantizer and use that output to get another melody on the third oscillator. So because this is set to a major scale, I'm going to get some semitone clashes in there, and there's also a bit of detuning. I'm going to change the scale on my quantizer to a minor 7 chord to get a more harmonious sound, albeit still slightly detuned. So this gives a lot of potential for starting off a patch from the 3 independent sample and hold circuits. The next part of the module that I'll look at is the clock, and this is a temperature compensated 1 volt per octave tracking clock. As well as being used as a clock or a gate source, it can be used as an audio source, as this goes up to 23 kHz. So I'll take my output cable directly into the clock's output and we'll listen to that. The onboard temperature compensated volt per octave tracking at the clock FM input, I'll add a pitch sequence to that and we'll hear the simple sequence start to move. And the clock rate acts as a tuning. The external clock input will affect the sample and hold B circuit and the random flux and the toggle AB if the jumper on the back is set to do so. I've got a sub saw wave and a saw wave from a livewire AFG taken into 2 separate filters which are panned hard left and right, and I'll use the 2 sample and hold circuits to show how A responds to an internal clock and sample and hold B responds to the external clock. Here's the first sub saw and filter. This will be affected by sample and hold A. Here's the saw wave and the second filter, which will be affected by sample and hold B. Here's adding some level to the internal noise for the sample and hold so you can hear that move on circuit A. And then the same for B. Here's a faster clock. So you can hear these random voltage changes are moving in time with each other, so slowing down the internal clock and then adding a faster second clock to the external input, you'll be able to see and hear that sample and hold A is moving slower than sample and hold B. You can see my external clock level on the red LED cable and the internal clock on the purple LED on the module. We can go the other way around and have a fast internal clock and a slower external clock to create that overlapping. Now we're looking at the random pulse, which has a gate density and a range division switch. First I'll look at the range divider, which is a 7-stage dividing circuit that divides down the internal noise used for the circuit. The first and fastest setting is the most random and sounds closest to white noise, and if you were to work your way down through the stages you hear a more obvious tone to the sound. We'll listen to that at audio rate so you can hear how that works later on, but for now we'll stick to using the pulses as a gate source to trigger elements, which is the module to the left. Turning up the gate density, I can go into audio rates. Bringing that back down, you can hear these random pulses. Adding an offset to the CV input for gate density, you can see 0 volts has no gates, and as I rise the offset, you'll see the level of the LED cable change and the density of the pulses increases. Pressing the divide switch, you can hear the pulses get slower and seemingly less random as well. And you can still influence each of the 7 division stages with the density knob or CV. Here's the random pulses at audio rate, and I'm taking the output straight into my sound card. Turning up the gate density now, you'll start to hear the noise. As I flick through the pulse stage divider, you can hear those tone changes across those 7 division stages. The gate density still influences each stage. And we've still got that access to the CV over gate density as well. This is the voltage controlled opto integrator, and an integrator is traditionally used to smooth out pulse-based waveforms into trapezoid shapes and triangle shaped voltages. This opto integrator uses Vactrals and the normal to the random pulses section of the module. It creates these shapes based on the random pulses outputs. There is a control for this which goes from a really fast response to the input signal to a more slower and slewed signal. And plugging this in, I've got the output of the opto integrator going to control a bandpass filter. This is normal to the random pulses output, so changes there affect the opto integrator. Turning down the integration slope will get a different response. And the red and blue LED under the blue random pulse LED shows the positive and negative signal values of the opto integrator's output. We can add an offset to control the signal's response and the slope at the CV input. We can also use one of the sample and hold outputs to patch back into itself with the integrator circuit to add further variation. Taking a signal into the input eliminates the normalizing from the random pulses, and I'll add a square wave LFO at this input. Taking this square LFO directly into my filter, you can hear exactly what's going on and what's coming in. Taking out the LFO, I'll now use the sample and hold from circuit B. I'll also take the onboard toggle output into the integrator's curve CV control. So it's a great Vactral circuit that can be used to create envelopes and new CV sources either from the internal random pulses or any other input. The final thing to look at is the random flux voltage generator. The manual states this is one of the most versatile sections of the module that can breathe new life into a patch. It mimics smooth random control variations, and the flux output is affected by the external clock input, which when nothing is present at the external clock input is actually the main internal clock. The output starts to drift to a new voltage state with every clock pulse, and by default the drift between the voltages is set to be very slow. I've got a wavetable oscillator, and I'm going to take the random flux output to modulate the wavetable. You can hear this slowly drift between different values per clock pulse, which makes for a great complex LFO. With the R-flux influence input, we can influence the slew time of the circuit, and I'll use an offset first so you can see the level of that offset on the red LED in the cable. With a higher voltage present at the CV input, the slew time is much faster, with quicker changes in those random voltages. With the random flux probability, we can influence whether the signal generates a positive output or a negative output, and we can sort of pass signals through this, so I'll plug in an LFO and you can see the LFO signal changes on the LED cable. It might not be too obvious what's happening, but turning up the LFO rate you can hear the random flux start to follow that. And this works right up through audio rate as well. Sticking with the LFO and slowing it down, I'll use a sample and hold circuit B to influence the slew time between the random flux voltages. Starting to mix the different circuits on board is where the module starts to get really powerful, with the external clock affecting only some parts of the module, the internal clock with FM, 2 sample and holds and a third toggle output, also the random pulses, opto integrator and the random flux. Hit like and subscribe for more videos every week, and check the Patreon link in the video description to see how you can support my channel.